Thank you, Russell, for that introduction. Sorry. Damn it, I need a password. I know a few things about passwords. So I wanted to talk today about delivering software that is secure and usable. Whose job is that? So as Russell said, I'm a usability person by training, and after sort of working at UCL together with, for a while in a computer science department with developers on the first generation of internet systems, I kind of like stumbled into security as an area where I very quickly realized that I think most developers actually do implicitly know a few things about usability, or they know that there's information they should get, and there's something that will happen later. There will be testing, and and that if people don't actually like your product, that's not good. in the end, that awareness is there, but I found working in the computer science department that really nobody does that. If a product isn't usable and people don't want it, that doesn't happen because that's what the developer wanted. It was just that they didn't have the time, the skills to get the right information to shape what they're doing. And then I stumbled into security, where I very quickly discovered that security people actually have a completely different view of the world. They really don't care. In 1999, there were two papers published that illustrate the problem. So I was co-author of the first one, called Users Are Not the Enemy, where we, in a large technical company with 80% engineering trained staff, we actually found it was a war zone between the security department and those actually very technically literate people over the password policies and password rules, because they were just saying, we cannot follow those. And it really then led to a state of war. I'll illustrate that a bit more and what that looks like on the ground today. We basically said is, you can't, the security people really have no idea what the impact of the policies they're making is on the people who are supposed to follow them. And that's a problem. In the same year, a paper was published called Why Johnny Can't Encrypt, which was the study of PGP, the first widely available tool for email encryption, where Alma Witten and Doug Tiger showed that even with very careful instruction and people who wanted to encrypt their email, 80% of them failed, and even worse, most of them thought they had encrypted the mail they were sending, right? So really not good. So I think 1999, so that's been going on for 20 years now, right? There's also an even earlier paper by Mary Ellen Zurko and Robert Simon that pointed out, actually, it's not just the end users who have a problem with what the security people are pushing on them. It's the systems administrators and the developers have a problem too, because they're basically being told to do various things that in practice they find they can't do, or at least not very easily do. And whilst on the one hand, there's been this area called usable security, you've probably got I don't know, about 2,000-3,000 papers published now, some at the top usability conference, and now it's over the past 5 years been breaking into the top security conference, IEEE, S&P Symposium, ACM, CCS, Usenix, those kind of, NDSS is the last uncharted space in this territory, if anyone knows about that conference. So there are all these papers, and academically speaking, that looks really good, but in practice, I think it's really not that much has changed, and we're still seeing the consequences. I thought it was actually stunning. I mean, given that we published that paper in 1999 about saying, people can't cope with these password policies. That in 2003, NIST in the US published guidelines that basically talked about password strengths and what they have to do. And it took until 2017 for the man who wrote those password guidelines to actually admit that it's not possible to follow the rules. And he said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. That's great. I mean, fortunately, here in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre has a bunch of people who are really quite, I believe young people call it woke, about these kind of issues, and who'd actually really gone out and broken ranks amongst all the professional security organizations setting standards and said this from 2015 onwards. They changed the password guidance and actually said don't tell, people they have to have 64 strong passwords, with like, at least one uppercase, one character, one number, etc., etc., etc. This is ridiculous. We're not, passwords aren't captured by breaking them through brute force, or only a very, very small percentage are. Most of them are captured through spyware, through social engineering, and the strongest password doesn't help you in those cases. So please stop wasting people's time, with these impossible recommendations. And I think that's actually a really good example for the problem we have, is that security it's actually, you can't really trust what you're being told, that this is really going to be good and effective for security. And once people have experienced that, they're starting to actually look at what they're being told to do about security with a certain amount of skepticism. Let's see where that leads. To talk about the Witten and Tiger Award, if you want to illustrate the lack of progress there in terms of adoption of encryption, which really could fix a lot of problems we face today if we had that. Basically we could make phishing go away and a whole raft of other attacks if we actually widely deployed it. The paper received in 2015 the Test of Time Award. You might think an award is a great thing, but what this means is that the USIX community says this paper is still just as true today as it was 15 years ago. So that's actually, it's great. It's great to get the award, but actually what the reward signifies is utterly depressing, I would argue. Yeah, we've really made no progress there, and in the new place, in the new university I moved to in Germany, we're going to work very hard over the next 5 years to actually finally make a push to change that. Yeah. And I think basically it's like when you get even security people saying, I can't use it. One of my colleagues asked Phil Zimmerman, who invented PGP, whether he was using it, and he went like, no, it doesn't work on my phone. And, you can find lots of pieces like this where they're saying, I'm throwing in the towel, so it's right. So that's really, dysfunction junction, is how we could really describe the state of security in play today. And I spent most of my time researching what's going on in organizations. When typically, if I get a project or if I get called in to do some consultancy, they're saying like, the people aren't doing what they're supposed to do, and can you come in and help us, what they mean to make the people do what we want them to do. And then I have, I can summarize what the problem is for them. Well, it's not what you think it is. So just quickly going through some of these points is, just as it was in users are not the enemy, you find a lot of the rules that are being pushed onto people, in reality, they can't follow them. They either don't have, they don't know what it even means. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't have the right tools. Even when they try it, they fail. And that, if the effect of that is if you experience, that on the one hand, somebody shouts really loudly that security is very important and you must always do what it says to do, and then you experience that you can't do it, well, that changes how you look at it, doesn't it? You're going, I'm just not, I don't believe this anymore. And that's why General MacArthur actually, and I've been told by somebody who was in the military that this is still the first thing you learn in officer school is never give an order that can't be obeyed. Because if you do that once, from there on in, the orders have lost their power. And if you think about, go into an average organization and pick up this book of like 250 or whatever security policies, this is just not going to work anymore. We need a completely different approach, tear that down and actually start to give relevant, targeted, and actually effective guidance to people on what they should and shouldn't do. So even if you can follow a rule, what you experience is that being secure just zaps your productivity, you also stop following it, right? Because you don't go to work to do security, you go to work to develop, code, treat patients, do research, whatever. And if you find that the security just takes too much away from it, you'll also stop following it, and believe that it's sensible. So it's a bit like, this ironing board, which has been secured by screwing this metal base onto it, which has now reduced the functioning ironing space of this board by 50%, if not more. So that's what most security is like in practice if you were to follow it. And so people just stop doing it, and this is really what happens as a result, that is the default setting for most people in most organizations most of the time today when it comes to security is ignore or circumvent. And that's not good in a way, because I think we can't shut our eyes to the fact that attacking organizations, attacking nation states, and attacking individual consumers has become a very sophisticated, diversified industry. Yeah, you're basically facing people who can make a lot of money or can achieve their goals, to the extent that they've got division of labor, they've got support and help desks for the software, for the malware stuff they're writing or the attack tools they're writing, with customer service that ordinary consumers in the Western world can only dream of. One of the saddest things I've heard from when I spoke to people who'd been ransomwared, was that they said, well, but it was so easy, once I'd never heard of Bitcoin, but, the instructions I got, I managed to get it done within 10 minutes, and after I paid, they immediately released it, and they were raving about the customer service. Now, I think that says as much about the customer service we're getting ordinarily in services, in particular when you're dealing with technology, as it says about the sophistication of the attack community. So basically, on the one hand, we think it's funny. On the other hand, it's serious. The threat is serious. We need to do better. And the kind of, that just ignoring it or getting around it or just resigning and being helpless, so what we're seeing here is when you get ineffective security, some organizations think it's a great idea to fish their own employees as a way of teaching them to stop clicking on links. Which is just, people just resign. What you then now find is that many organizations, people don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be called out and things. So, to be safe, I'm just not clicking on any links anymore, including the ones from our customers and, legitimate information that I really should know. Surveys sent by the HR department or by a very expensive external supplier, we'll just not click any that anymore. And then you get the HR department shouting, how dare you classify our email about the survey as spam, as malicious phishing. Well, something isn't working here. It's just if you think about it, yes, you can tell people to stop clicking on links, but if what it in reality means is that you have to sit there for 5 minutes and ponder every email and check about 5 or 6 different indicators to figure out whether this is, and even if you have a tech background, half the time you sit there and you go like, I can't tell. I really can't. I can't be sure. So that's really, I think, what it is where a lot of these security measures are not effective. They're certainly not efficient, and they're downright dysfunctional. And what do security people think the response is? When they see people not behaving, is they just want to respond with security awareness, training, and education. So they're shouting louder. And they're not realizing that if you mandate the security training, you're taking more and more productive time away from people, right? If you now have to spend, 2 or 3 hours working through some stuff that I don't actually really believe in anyway, it's just you're consuming more and more of my time, and you are not helping me. because a lot of that material, it's not targeted, it's not well designed, it's just standard stuff put on by suppliers, and pushed down. So this is really, really not getting us anywhere. And I sometimes wish, we could just resuscitate, the father of cryptography, could bring him back to life. August Kerkhoffs, who wrote the cardinal principles of cryptography. And when I go and speak to some security, crypto specialists, and I say, Kerkhoffs' principles, and we start talking about that, they only know one of them, which is number 2, which they roughly describe as there's no security by obscurity. They don't even realize there were other rules, and that 3 of them were about usability. We've arguably, only solved number 5, which is, yes, you don't need to lug something big and sort of around anymore. But 3 and 5, we haven't done anything with, And I actually think anybody who designs security should put Kerkhoffs' 6 principles over their desk. It must be easy to use and must neither require stress of mind nor the knowledge of a long series of rules to make it work. Right? He knew that. He was looking at soldiers, with the backpack, taking their communication into the field, and he knew they would have to do this whilst the general is shouting, General A is shouting out, I need to know where General B is, and what is General C saying, and, now, I need the answer now. They needed to be able to do this. And I think, that's basically a change that we need to instill in security people. I'll come back to what we need to do with those pesky security people in a minute. As a developer, I think it's very easy, and I empathize with you a lot. I think you've been actually put in a difficult position. But I think we need to also accept that if you just say, I don't care, I'll do what's possible within, my realms, and I'm not going to make my job unnecessarily difficult by caring about what the impact, if security people tell me to implement this measure, I'll do it. And I don't care about whether in reality people can use it, or whether it stops people doing their job. But ultimately, if you don't care about it, it kind of it does end up on what's currently, mistakenly is described as the weakest link. They're saying the weakest link and mean the users are stupid and they're not doing what we tell them to do, and that allows the attacks. But they're actually the weakest link in the sense of they are the ones who have the least knowledge and skills to deal with the problem, and they actually have the least influence on dealing with the problem. These are problems that we need to fix at source, not by then putting everybody, have everybody spend 4 hours a day learning about new security threats and new measures they need to do about it. That's just not going to work. I mean, what's actually very clear is developers face productivity demands, and I want to highlight, if you're interested, email me. I can give you a whole list of papers that have come out in the past 2 or 3 years, which look at very specific problems that developers have with implementing security. And they take a different tone from what's happened in the past, which is we're just blaming those careless developers, to actually saying what can we do to make the developer's job easier? And I can't really cover all of that in the talk today, but if you're interested, I can give you all the references. I just want to highlight this one here, which won the NSA's Best Science of Cybersecurity Award a couple of years ago, where they looked at, if you're ending up with vulnerabilities in code, where do they actually come from? And they did a study with actual real developers, and this took, sort of several days, not just an MTurk study where you get a bunch of people to click on some boxes and then come to very sweeping conclusions. So actually, a very, very well-designed and careful study that sort of replicated what you could say is actually an ecologically valid environment in which people were writing code and making certain decisions about it. And what they looked at was basically is what happens. We can give one group the official documentation, we can give one a book. One is told to use Stack Overflow as a resource, and one group can pick for free. And so they, when you basically look at, so Stack Overflow is the orange one, they really, in terms of productivity, really the group that used Stack Overflow came out best. Now, when you basically, the book also did, and the book did pretty well, even though nobody liked the book out of the participants. Should also say that, the ones who used Stack Overflow were, so the official documentation, the official specification for the software performed worst, and significantly worse than Stack Overflow. But when you look at how good was the security of the code that was turned in, Stack Overflow didn't do so well. So the people who used the official documentation did best, and the people who use Stack Overflow did worst. So what you're seeing here is is again this insidious flipping of security and productivity. And I think that really highlights where the core of the problem is at the moment. If you're doing what they tell you to do by security, you're not productive enough, and what's the consequence? Your line manager is going to shout at you, or you're going to have an unhappy customer because you don't deliver. But what, in the series that this group of researchers in Germany and a couple of others in the States and in the UK have done a series of studies, and they said, you know what, if the source is Stack Overflow, so what we should do is clean up Stack Overflow, right? I mean, that's minimization of the problem, That's the logical thing to do. Similarly, but you wouldn't believe, I've been trying to fight in some educational institutions about, can we please review all the programming courses and all the technical courses and remove all the stuff that's bad for security from it and replace it with a secure option? Again, you'd think that's logical, and that minimizes sort of it. Don't let people learn bad habits to start with. My God, the amount of pushback I've gotten for that. You don't interfere with other people's. And but, you here in this database course, you do this, and that basically, just enables a SQL injection attack. And I go, no, So, and that's really, it's not the way to overcome this problem. We need to get away from this territoriality and pushing the problem onto others. We need to work together to fix it. That's really my plea. And I think when we're looking, if we're highlighting what is it about security people we need to do here is, look, you guys, it's too, you're just basically thinking, security is the most important thing in the world, and essentially you're saying everybody needs to know as much as you do about security and needs to spend all their time doing security. I'm sorry, this doesn't work in a modern production environment. We have division. We need division of labor. The first thing you need to do is clean up your act and make things simpler, and clearer. And please don't recommend stuff to people unless you've determined it actually really is effective for fixing the problem you're worried about. Yeah? I think what we're actually seeing is that essentially IT security is a very immature discipline, and it needs to grow up a lot faster than it has over the next few years. A lovely study, so Russell was mentioning socio-technical work, and that's actually been something that's been going on here in the UK. Originally GCHQ, and now the NCSC actually started to engage with researchers. And one of the research institutes I found, in fact the first institute they founded, which is based at UCL and which I led for 5 years as founding director, is a multidisciplinary approach looking at human behavior in security and the relationship, and that basically includes everybody, including the security people and the developers, and even down we have mathematicians working in that particular group and working together. And one of the leading exponents has been Debbie Ashenden, and I think this particular study, this idea she developed with her colleague Darren Lawrence at Cranfield University is really, really interesting, that they said, let's go and listen to people what the problem is, and then let's take a socio-technical approach to bringing the people together and showing them how they together can solve this problem. So they listened to the developers, and I think what they found here is something we're hearing over and over again. For the developers, security is a source of problems. It gets in the way, it slows me down, it tells me I can't do things that I think are a jolly brilliant way of delivering the utility I need to deliver. It's a hurdle, and they actually felt they're constantly being judged by security people, that they felt like they were being stalked, and the security people were just waiting to say like, oh no, you can't do that. Right, because it's bad for security. So it's a really kind of, they described it as they're shooting our baby kind of problems. And of course, what happened as a result was they weren't volunteering to security what they were doing. They only ever, when they were asked about things, gave the minimum information rather than giving the full picture. And of course, that means you're just kicking the can down the road, and the security problems emerge later, and then it's much more difficult and more expensive to fix them, just as it is with usability. The solution they proposed was, they said, we need to kind of reprogram the security specialists. And that's an ongoing effort, and GCHQ supports that, and you'll see that coming out, that in certification of security specialists in future, they will demand these people actually capable of going and having a constructive conversation with somebody else. That's going to be news to some of them, but I think for others, it is not that they don't want to, but nobody ever told them, and nobody ever taught them how to do this. And so they basically developed a little training program, sort of conflict resolution. How do you actually go and convince people of, what you want them to do, social marketing skills. And if you're trying to change people's behavior, how do you do that? Make it easy for them to do the right thing, except that it's not a case of I tell them once, and that's it then. I need to support, replacing a highly learned routine behavior. This is what I normally do when I implement this kind of function. You need to replace that with another one, and that takes time, and you need to support, and you need to find where are the little blockers, and snags that stop them from changing behavior. And they also then sort of looked at, and they followed this up, looking at, sort of created some metrics. How do we actually, can we measure whether the relationship has improved? I think that's a really, really good example of that's a positive step in the right direction, and it's great that it's here distributed. So I think the fact that the security people said, they would, yes, actually, I need to try and understand the developer's point of view, and, oh, actually, God, these people really care about the code they write. And when you go and basically bash them and say this is bad, this is rubbish, they actually really take it to heart, and you're kind of destroying. Yes, great, that's a good first step. Let's improve then of how we go and discuss these issues. And what the work in the socio-technical domain has really now spawned is there's a whole range of what's called creative security engagement techniques, which is aimed at security people to work either with developers, with end users, with others on, using actually visual materials, or actually using things like physical modeling with Lego, to actually go, and so that people can understand the security interventions, and they can push back and say, like, but look, you're now cutting off access to my most important information resource, and so on. That's actually, there's a whole lot happening in this space. So you can look at, just Google for creative securities, or go to the EU Trespass website. There's a whole raft of different techniques available. In a study I did in the US with colleagues a few years ago, we went into 3 companies that actually didn't just say we do cracking good security, our software is super secure. We would actually largely subscribe to that. That was the case. But they also said we understand that it's important that people can use our secure software, and we produce usable security. And NIST in the US said, great, we really need this. Please, let these researchers in and do a case study so we can show all other companies out there how it's done, what they can do to make sure their secure software is also usable. And it was actually really interesting that it turned out to be pretty much complete rhetoric. The management had said we need usable security, But then, well, what happened? In one company that actually hired some usability specialists who the developers then didn't really want to talk to. And actually what it turned out was that they really had a mindset that made one of my co-authors on this paper, who had been teaching software engineering in a top US university for over 20 years, he had to go and lie down and actually recover from the fact. He said, like, I've been telling these people about the importance of usability and why you need to basically get this right at the beginning for 20 years. What happens? What happens to them when they come out and start working? How do they end up with this view of, security is more important than usability? It's a luxury, it's cost time and effort. Well, if a client really wants it and wants to pay for it, we'll do it. But basically, when they really used the security is more important as an excuse, because we looked in vain for any criteria, any measurable criteria for judging how much usability, how much security do you actually have? And there were no methods, there was no systematic testing, no benchmarking, sort of one of the things you found was that the organization then found that the problems all ended up somewhere else, not with the development team. And so one very helpful intervention to do is to make developers take turns working on the support desk and letting them firsthand experience those. The other thing that we actually really found was like it was very, very tribal, and that actually reminded me even of when I first started at UCL, was that I said developers don't go out to make software unusable, but when I was working with them, they would almost always follow my advice, except for in one particular case. And that was when they thought following my advice would make them look stupid, silly, a bit dumbing down stuff in front of their peers. That was when they wouldn't follow my advice. Right? And I think that really hasn't changed. It's really, software development is an intensely tribal profession. Peer approval for most developers is a very, very important thing. And that, of course, means it's a self-reinforcing thing. And currently, with there are some development cultures, in particular consumer-facing industries, where things get written more into the process, and there the developers sort of like absorb it. But there's still also quite a big part out there where really the usability message hasn't really sunk in, and even if new recruits come in, they very quickly forget about it because that's not how you get recognized and do well. But I think what I would say in these companies, again, don't blame particular people. Management went like, make it so. We want usable security now, do this, right? And not recognizing is you need to be specific about whose responsibility is it to do what. You need to figure out, how do I support developers? And actually, I want to actually say, this is in another company in the UK where we did this as a consultancy project. We found it was really possible to do this. So they really had completely, their security was terrible. Their usability was quite good because they were a consumer-facing company. And within months, they basically hired a security specialist, but they also just looked around, who can contribute what, and very quickly found the business analysts. If you went to talk to them and said, do you actually understand these risks, the attacks? And they went, yes, of course I do. Well, could you please put them into the storyboard so it's visible to everybody all the time? Yeah, sure I can. Nobody ever asked me to do this before. Security was added as a topic in the stand-ups, so it came up, and once, then it becomes a routine. It was actually really good for very quickly spotting problems and also working out how to fix them. They said 2 developers could volunteer to become monitor OWASP all the time, go to the meetings, and then come back and tell everybody else about what was going on and what had been found out. They basically created a subgroup whose job it was to review the libraries and tools and updating them and make sure they were always supporting security. And when they went to the testers and said, like, do you mind if we give you some training and make you test for security stuff? They went like, yay, right? Because these guys are worried about their jobs all the time. The more automated testing tools there are, the more stuff goes away. So they went like, yes, please, And I think that actually shows is the way of how we get a grip on the problem is collaboration and trust, and that's really what socio-technical literature would tell you is you should be doing. Foster collaboration and trust. Don't keep bashing people and blaming people. That's not helping. So one of my other colleagues in the UK, Charles Weir, if you go to securedevelopment.org, he actually puts together a lot of resources and some materials for, as part of, helping to improve security skills, but in a very supportive way, in a nice way, and always, putting understanding of what actually the job of developers is and how to deal with it. So, to conclude, so I would actually say is, really, the message I want you to take away, don't join in the blame game. If you're being blamed by security people, don't basically start retaliating, and don't just go and push stuff onto the eventual users of your products, as the weakest thing. Everybody needs to change a bit, and everybody needs to do a bit. I think first and foremost, the responsibility is on security to clean up its act. Security is too complex, it creates too much work, and often actually it turns out that for no particular benefit, they need to become a lot more professional and really test out, and simplify things. Yes, end users they can't just sit there and pretend it's still the 20th century, and that not all of their value is online. If you want to be online and have all your stuff on there, you need to learn a bit more about, they need to actually understand some threat models. And if we can give them behaviors, if we can give them behavior advice that really works, then they need to learn to change that behavior. It's going to be, this is sort of stuff I work on, it's going to be a tough road to recovery to get them out of, the current perspective they have based on past experience, but it's got to be done. I think as developers, my challenge to you would be, is again, you should be up to date with threat models. You should kind of take an interest of what's going on in that space. I mean, frankly, most of us love crime and crime stories and that kind of stuff, right? And it's actually not that tedious. It's quite entertaining to some extent, as I showed, when I started talking to you about the support desks and things, and actually understanding what really happens out there in the attack community is just good background knowledge to have. And you ought to know about standard, known vulnerabilities and avoid them, and key countermeasures that have been proven to be effective, and learn how to implement them. And once you've learned how to do it, it's not going to be a drag anymore. That should just be routine. I think also is the managers, they can't just go like, make it so. And you get that it's not just with usable security, but with security as well. Yeah, we really care about cybersecurity, and we invest like X amount, but not really, not doing the job as a manager to actually make your organization work and help your people to find out how to work together, and encouraging them when transformation is needed. That is, that they really need to do that job of brokering collaboration and make sure you're not asking people to do impossible things, that people are only asked to do things that they can do. So I think at the end of the day, you guys, you're at the center of all of this. You have that key job of bringing everything together in the product. And so I think you need to also then, I think sometimes when, because we understand how complex our own expertise is, and you kind of tend to assume that when security people tell you stuff, that they're really as expert, and that what they know is as mature and as well-founded as what you know. No, don't assume that. Push back, right? Basically, it's okay to make security people justify what they're asking you to, and it's okay to that they have to account to you for that this really is effective, So I think basically take away, you've got a license to question. security, and you've got a license to push them to support you properly and make your job of integrating security as doable as possible. I think it's also, if you're not defending the utility of the product, and that's really what, key part of usability, then who is going to, right? Maybe in companies where you have a project manager or a user experience department, they will take up that fight for you, but not all companies have that, and then it's really just you who defends this. And demand tools and support to protect your productivity, because we know that they're not going to scale back on that. So but I think above all, it's like. So I should really upgrade to Game of Thrones references instead of Star Trek. But I think I love Jean-Luc Picard, and engage. That's really what we need and what we need to get done. So thank you very much. I think I've got 5 minutes for questions.